Welcome back. This video is going to be an update on my video about clumsy Democrats, and it's going to address the question is what have Democrats learned so far? What should we have learned about how to face Trump by now? Because let's be honest, change is hardly going to come from the Democratic Party. It has to come from civil society, as mentioned in that video. Number one, lawsuits are necessary but are not sufficient. As in his first administration, Trump is overwhelming lawyers by opening new fronts for every executive decision they stop, and as noted by the New York Times, undoing the effects of his decisions, no matter how many victories you have in the courtrooms, may be hard. Besides, the Supreme Court is giving him power to even force out prematurely Biden appointees. In other words, the Supreme Court are giving him a lot of leeway. They are not properly stopping Trump. They are just making some concessions at the same time. At the same time, they block some of his more counterproductive ideas. Something that has raised concerns about the Federal Reserve, because the precedent of the litigations in the case of the National Labor Relations Bureau, that same rationale could be applied to the Federal Reserve. And in the worst case, in the best case, Powell is still up for confirmation in 2026, confirmation that, of course, he's not going to get. In the end, even if MAGA is out of power in 2029, reversing the damage to the federal government may be hard and slow. And here we could have an interesting article in Fortune, but also we have the precedent of all the changes that were ramped by Orbán in Hungary, that precisely were hard and slow to reverse. Even would have been hard and slow to reverse, even if the opposition would have found a coherent voice to take Hungarians out of apathy in order to stop Orban's endless rounds of re-elections. And even if this didn't happen, Trump will be able to appoint Powell's replacement in 2026. What is laughable is the reaction of the Democratic Party, which brings us to the question we have posed at the beginning of this video. Number one, the Elon Musk campaign. So they began to articulate a strategy around ousting Elon Musk by June, which is pretty much idiotic because, yes, Elon Musk is not popular, but Elon Musk is not an issue that is determinant or salient for most voters. So with that, the Democrats were only making evident their detachment from the expectations of the working class that in 2024 stopped supporting them and sided with Trump. Two, their inability to rebuke Biden and to present an alternative. Yes, Jason Foreman's article is one step in the right direction. That article in Foreign Affairs, where where he criticized some positions of Bidenomics, Biden's economic policy. I don't agree with them all, but I agree with some. And it's a step in the right direction because that shows that at least right or wrong, there are reasonable voices who are willing to say, well, Biden was wrong. Voters didn't vote for Trump on a whim. They did it because they rejected the Democratic Party. Uh, Actually, if you see polls, for instance, among Latinos, you see that they don't have the Latinos have the same concerns and priorities that the working class, but not of MAGA. But then the working class voters don't read foreign affairs, so we have to find mechanisms to bring to the public these alternatives, and above all, or as important as that, the mea culpa the Democratic Party has must express, so people can give you a second chance. But if you try to avoid the issue and continue treating voters as if they were stupid, the only thing you are going to get if Vance or somebody else in MAGA getting sworn in January 20 of 2029 as the next president. Then we have to stop the counterproductive stances of many Democrats who prefer to blame the voters. The voters are maybe right or wrong, but if they are wrong, it's because you have done nothing to help them connect the dots. It's not only eight, according to a recent poll, I could see 80% vote on policy, 20% vote on personality. They may have wrong ideas about policy, but that's how they vote. And if you don't present them policy, why do you expect the voters to vote for Kamala, Clinton, or whoever you want they to vote? But just because you said so, just because you are cool, that's completely stupid. That people should be shown the door because they are causing more harm. And a lot of those people are in the far left. People who still want, despite the chart showing the evolution of Kamala Harris' vote, wants to insist that Kamala Harris lost because of misogyny and racism, which is not sustained by the facts. This may explain the reluctance of Latinos to change only allegiances. Only 2% of Trump voters regret their vote. This is unfortunately hard, and it's not just that. A recent position about was presented in CNN when they asked voters if they would vote, if they support Trump's budget bill, even if that increased the deficit and the debt, and the majority of voters sided with the tax cuts, which is not surprising considering the low levels of trust in government, which should concern Democrats since different from Republicans, especially nowadays Republicans, you need government to work, and the trust in government is at historic lows. So these idiotic people who like to ask about pronouns should be shown the door, because for every cool activist you get on board, you lose 1 million voters in the working class. It's not a good business. Number four, the lack of a positive message on the economy, as it's not enough to say that Trump is bad, especially after the negative perceptions about Biden, and the fact that voters can see Democrats throwing immigrants under the bus instead of reframing that issue to rescue them from the identity left to which Biden outsourced immigration policy in the first place. So making immigration a toxic issue. In other words, they see Democrats being moved by the polls without any moral compass. And after letting the cool activists at the far left destroying the positive trend immigration was getting in public opinion for 2.5 decades, according to Gallup polls, her response is to discreetly throwing them under the bus, as it was shown in the vote of Gallego and Fetterman for Trump's immigration bill, one in recent immigration bill. Then, five, Democrats must make a mea culpa. They must ask for a second chance and rebuke harshly their moments of improvisation and weakness. Like you remember the Schumer's strong letter? Yeah, moments like that. Because these have tarnished the image of Democrats for so long. The Democratic Party has become the party who loses graciously, who give fiery speeches, but then cave at the moment of voting. The Democratic Party has become the party of weakness, and that must be corrected because, in as past experience, even highlighted by Bill Clinton once, voters will always prefer somebody who is grown than somebody who is weak. Then there is something positive that has come out in recent days, which is the shadow cabinet, the idea of a shadow cabinet, which would be welcome, as this idea would set a clear line that isolates the identitarian left, which even Bernie Sanders has decried. Because let's be honest, you cannot marry the Al Gore's reimagining government, or much less the New Deal, with the whims of the identitarian left. And B, formulate Democrats must formulate positive messages, not just that Trump is bad. Not that's not enough to win in 2026 or 28. And it would be desirable not to have just one shadow cabinet, but two. One of the at the economic populist left, led by Bernie Sanders, and another one at the center, as the one proposed by Elisa Slotkin. And then let voters, as we approach the next primaries, let voters decide what they prefer the most. So let the voters decide, but present the alternatives. Saying that Trump is bad, or that he's not cool, is not enough. Finally, to end this video, let me discuss two relevant articles from Foreign Affairs. First, we have How to Save a Democracy by Laura Gamboa. And here the author says that the opposition in the United States has been overwhelmed, to say the least, reeling from electoral defeat and shocked by the bliss of the Trump's administration power grab. leaving the main opposition organization, which is the Democratic Party, and unfortunately also the civil society, uh, uncertain about the path forward and hesitant to take bold steps. The delay is costly, I agree, but let's consider that the alternative, what we have right now, is a recipe for disaster, that is Democrats playing dead. They, in order to set the parameters of the debate, Democrats must present a centrist alternative and a FDR reasonable left alternative. That way, you cover most of the parameters of the debate, more of the field of ideas, and let voters decide. Because if voters, as much as I like the idea of a new deal and a reform based on FDR's ideals, if voters are not prepared for that because of all the weakness they have seen in the Democratic Party, there is no way you can force them. So we have first a problem with the Democratic Party, that is that it keeps playing dead and doesn't want to hurt Biden's feelings. That's another point. Despite the almost 3 million popular votes that meant a repudiation of his policies, justified or not, or why, or what voters perceived of his policies, because let's be honest, it was not just his policies, it was the communication of the good parts of those policies that was deliriously poor and mismanaged. The civil society will have to rescue the Democratic Party before the Democratic Party can save us for democracy. Because if we wait for the Democratic Party and they keep betting on creating rallies around personalities which have ambiguous messages, because they are convinced that the fall in trans popularity is something they are going to necessarily capitalize, then we are lost. So it will have to be the civil society, and they should start with ideas. You like Clinton the most? Okay, you adopt a centrist position. You like FDR the most, like me, then push for a New Deal. It's precisely the fact that they have opted to accommodate with the Trump administration, making just by making fire speeches while helping confirm controversial nominees, or collaborating to pass a funding bill without safeguards protecting Congress Congress's power of the purse, or limits on the dismantling of the bureaucracy, which implies lots of institutional intelligence that is unfortunately lost it's going to be hard to recover. And their acquiescence to demands to support the government agenda when faced with financial threats. What is all this what has made them look weak? And if a third party searches to fill the void the Democratic Party is leaving, the consequences could be catastrophic. And yes, Erdogan and Orban are examples of what may happen when the opposition waits too much in the name of the quorum, or by partisanship, or whatever. So Democrats must present alternatives, and they should present them now. They are powerless in Congress, yes, but they still have a mouth. Open your mouth, speak up. Then the author mentioned the example of Hugo Chavez as a case for moderation, but I believe she's wrong. because Chavez came up with reforms that used the good old prices of the time to increase the living standards of the working class, even if at the expense of their future or their institutions. And the opposition not only failed to admit past mistakes of the Venezuelan dysfunctional Congress, but to present a sane, sustainable alternative to Chavez policies. They only brought personalities, but they were reluctant to admit past mistakes. In the case of Democrats, time is of the essence to present a credible alternative to Trump's policies and to admit the shortcomings of the Biden era. And considering the positioning of Democrats as weak and woke, they must be aggressive. They must show that they are not trying to find the right fight to start showing some aggressiveness. No, they should be aggressive right now, regardless of the issue that is going to spearhead your message. But you must show that you have a position on all the issues, not just play dead and stay silent. And actually, every fight, even if secondary, may be an opportunity to spearhead your position on the main issue, which right now is uncertainty about income, about the future of the economy, and you are doing nothing, or worse, you are choosing the wrong targets, like for instance, trying to run on Elon Musk, which is, shows the childishness and frivolity of the people who is advising the Democratic Party. Then the author mentions the case of Álvaro Uribe, which is pertinent. Democrats must block Trump's policies as they present alternatives. Unfortunately, as mentioned before, Gallegos and Fetterman's vote on immigration, as well as Schumer's vote on a continuing resolution that gave Trump extraordinary powers over appropriations, point in the opposite direction. So it's not enough about that you block Trump's policies. You must present alternatives. So it's you're not diverting your message. Let's say when you open your mouth, you say you dedicate 10 to 20% to say why you are opposing the policy, and 80% to say what are you proposing instead as an alternative. And not everybody are going to propose the same alternative. They will depend on what line do you prefer, Bill Clinton's or FDR's, but at least you are presenting alternatives and covering the middle ground that otherwise may be taken by the third party. That's not very difficult to understand. It's a little bit of understanding of a strategy, which unfortunately is not on fashion in today's Democratic Party. Then I have a disagreement with the author when she says that using the erosion of democracy is a good spearheading issue. She mentions the case of Colombia and Guatemala, but in the case of the United States, especially in the current juncture, it could be a recipe for losing the next elections. Not only democracy is not not only democracy is not salient, but also trust in government is at historic lows since the Obama administration. So notice that even the weakness shown by Obama has affected the trust in government. It's not something that started with Trump's first administration. So the spearheading message must be linked to the most salient issue and must be determinant of the vote, which in this case, as said before, is economic uncertainty. The 2023 demonstrations in Israel against Netanyahu's judicial overhaul are a good example of protests at work, yet Their effect is dubious. Even in Israel, today's hostage protests have not produced much results, especially when we need to suppress the noise to transmit new narratives as clearly as possible. When a vote reflects a repudiation of the status quo, this is important to present new alternatives. And rallies, as cool as they may look, are not a good way of presenting alternatives because sometimes the message is getting lost in the slogans, the cheerleading, and the noise that are proper of these activities. Besides, demonstrations are supposed to be like infomercials. But with the present decline in mass media, their informative role is uncertain, at least until the message has been correctly associated in the minds of the voters to well-defined brands or couple of brands, and as I mentioned before, Clinton and FDR, and the protests only play the role of demonstrations of force. Because let's be honest, you are not going to transmit alternative ideas in rallies and demonstrations. Consider that in the United States, we may be sliding into a pathetic attitude towards the status quo that goes beyond the rejection of the authoritarian leader. In the United States, we have a deep rejection of the status quo itself. We should be taken as a warning because if we allow that rejection of the status quo slide into apathy, then we are in problem because that that may mean a situation precisely like Hungary, where people may not like Orban, but they like the socialists and liberals less. And besides, many grassroots have been polluted by the identitarian left under the placid approval of the Democratic Party itself, which has created precisely a disconnection with the voters who normally don't go to those rallies, which means that organizing the civil society for a different brand of activism would involve the investment Democrats are not even considering right now. And if you are not going to engage in that investment, at least draw a clear line with the identitarian left, because that way you may lose the voters of those who like to get their pronouns asked, but then you will get many, many more votes back, may get many more votes back among the working class. Then, seven, or finally, in about this article, a network to protect politicians and activists is desirable. It would be desirable. And in fact, that is in a way, though a very selective even and basic form coming from the civil society. Like, for instance, the cases in which lawyers have represented foreign students threatened with deportation. The problem with the Democratic Party is that it's built on the basis of adulation and cheerleaders. So this network will have to be deployed. So this network will have to be developed by the civil society. It's not it should not be its top priority, because its top priority should be to present alternatives to the voters that have been alienated by the Democratic leadership of recent years. But granted, a network like this could be a welcome idea if developed by the civil society. Then we have a second article, is only consequences of a state capture, Elizabeth, written by Elizabeth David Barrett. And here the author says that the state captors, of course, do not constrain their manipulations to banks. They also change the government economic policies and regulations. In other cases, captors simply get exempted status that favors firms from regulation or tariffs. And we mentioned that in the case uh, of Hungary, Orban's Hungary, and Farid Zakaria in Age of Revolutions, and in other articles in the Washington Post, have also addressed this issue. Consider that here civil society have a huge role because captors normally take care to dismantle whatever bodies might investigate them or otherwise check their efforts. Remember how Trump fired 21 inspectors general just before Dodge started arbitrarily cutting expenses and redefining contracts. Sometimes oligarchs just steal directly from the state. That's the case of Erdogan, for example, who changed Turkey's public procurement law multiple times so that he could personally dictate the outcome of tenders. He has since used this power to channel government businesses to five conglomerates, which are among the world's 10 most successful companies at winning public contracts. In exchange, these businesses, many of which own media properties, have showered the Turkish president with favorable news coverage donated to charities run by his party and pressure their employees to vote for Erdogan. That's exactly what also happened in the case of Orban's Hungary, as we mentioned in our video about that case, when we made parallels with between Orban and Trump. Then the author says that rebuilding state institutions is even more challenging as new leaders may want to purge the bureaucracy, but mass firings would look like a tit for tat. So that's a secondary reason, but the most important reason is that they would got institutions of needed staff. In other words, it would make the government inoperative. That's not easy to solve because that people that who has been have been fired by Dodge and is going to fire by Trump in with his spending cuts represent an institutional memory that are in the procedures, that are in the norms followed by those bureaucrats, and their absence is not going to be easy to be solved overnight, especially as these norms allow these people to act as a team and not so the personal qualifications of each replacement we could get in 2029 to the people by Trump is going to appoint or simply leave the vacancy open, that people is going to have to learn to work with other people who are as qualified as him or her, and that adds additional time. Then she says that the best way to address a state capture is to avoid it from the start. But unfortunately for Americans, Trump's and Musk's takeover is well underway. Fortunately, that's true. That's what we have mentioned. The US bureaucracy has already lost thousands of workers, and thousands more are at risk Critical regulation agencies, including the Federal Communications Commission and the Federal Trade Commission, or for instance, the Financial Consumer Protection Bureau, are now led by Trump loyalists. The Internal Revenue Service and the Federal Reserve are at their crosshairs, and Trump has staffed the FBI and the Department of Justice with favorites he hopes will go after his enemies. Just consider how bizarre is that Stephen Miller is dictating policy informally inside the Justice Department. Besides, Trump has moved to suspend the enforcement of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act and backtrack on corporate transparency requirements, which is basically it's about businesses receiving bribes to make businesses abroad. And add to that, for instance, the case mentioned by Farid Zakaria about the risk of graft when it comes to tariff exemption, or the way for instance, the Bureau of Labor Statistics may be at risk if Trump decides that the numbers, he doesn't like the numbers statistics show. So embellishing his own record. We have just mentioned how he has fired historians in the federal government just because he didn't like the way they were writing history. So here are many lessons that Democrats should have learned and incorporated in a strategy. And yet we see bizarre examples. When they are not playing dead, they are jumping to discuss isolated numbers, like the latest GDP number that was very episodic, that was very isolated because it reflected basically the anticipation of many actors to Trump's tariffs, which has increased the amount of imports, and well, that has affected the number. So it was, in other words, it was not representative of the trend. Or consider the way they want to articulate on a campaign on Elon Musk, which is not salient or much less determinant of the vote. So that brings us again to the question, who is advising the Democratic Party? And it's up to the civil society to demand an answer to that question from the people who were repudiated in 2024 and still doesn't have to have a clue about why that happened. And having said that, let me leave you with our newscast.
Good evening. This is Brian Thomas Simons, and these are the main headlines of this hour. Among other news,
former President Biden says he doesn't remember when he appointed Caroline Leavitt as press secretary. As former President Biden convoked for the second time a press conference to announce the first accomplishments of his second administration, he admitted he didn't remember when he appointed Caroline Leavitt as press secretary. Probably Kamala hired her, or maybe it was Jill, and she forgot to tell me. I don't remember. What matters is that we are going to make America great again, declared the former statesman before he was invited to get back home by his nurses. Jill and Hunter Biden register rights over Joe Biden. We need to protect Joe's legacy now that he has started his second term, declares former First Lady before Mr. Biden announces the first 3 accomplishments of his second term. After receiving the letter from the Library of Congress that credits them with the rights over Joe Biden, Jill and Hunter Biden declared that anybody mentioning the former president's name will have to pay them royalties. Hunter is out of a job and I have to pay for his allowance. We need that money. Besides, if the DNC wants to support Rachel Zegler's Snow White, it's only fair that they also support Joe's family. Besides, we need to protect Joe's legacy now that he has started his second term, declared the former First Lady. Then, to end the press conference, Mr. Biden was allowed behind an improvised podium to announce the first 3 accomplishments of his second term. A. Peace in Palestine now that, at last, his friend Bibi remembered the lessons of 9/11. B. A great economy now that working-class voters have learned to take inflation uncertainty with a sense of humor. C. Latinos insist on being called Latinx, which has consolidated the popularity of the Democratic Party among Hispanics. In heartbreaking scene. After claiming he had fallen down the stairs for a second time, President Macron seeks help for domestic abuse. Confirming a story covered by the Babylon Bee and initially taken for fake news. It was revealed that President Macron had not fallen down the stairs for a second time as he originally claimed. Right away, the French head of state sought help for domestic abuse and received counseling. It breaks my heart, but at the same time, I feel liberated. I am learning to love myself. I am important too. And I have told Bridget that we have to learn to solve our differences with dialogue. She has a temper, but I am confident that in the end, love will prevail, declared the French president before leaving for Jakarta, where you will sign a memorandum of understanding for the recent sale of 42 Rafale jets to Indonesia. San Francisco public schools turn to the 21st century with grading for equity system, which will correct underachievement, by using the innovative resource of turning Fs to Cs and Bs to A's. San Francisco public schools will improve the school performance of its most disadvantaged students by using the grading for equity system, which will allow San Francisco to get into the 21st century through the big door. Why afflicting the students' self-esteem with arithmetic when we can make everybody happy? And grading for equity has an answer for everything. For instance, a Latinx who refuses to be called Latinx will receive a C, while the Latinx who embrace the term will receive As and Bs, depending on their enthusiasm. Besides, even answer A, which concerned Education Secretary Cardona, will receive proper treatment, as in the case of gender. If you perceive that 47 plus 55 is 912 or any other number, that's your perception, much more important than a number given by mathematicians. And we all must respect it, declared Superintendent Maria Sue for Newsweek.
This has been the news of this hour. Sponsored by Church of the Holy Redeemer's Power in the Spirit. Have you accepted Jesus Christ as your personal Savior? Did you vote for Trump in 2016 and then in 2020? This is the right church for you. If so, Church of the Holy Redeemer's Power in the Spirit is the only Christian church that can promise you in the Lord to have 72 virgins in heaven for only a donation of $50 a month. You will have access to those 72 virgins in heaven. For an additional $25, you will be allowed to replace 10 of them, and for $100, Heaven Premium, you will be allowed to choose them for yourself. Guaranteed, if you're not satisfied with those 72 virgins after you die, full refund of your money. We accept Visa, MasterCard, American Express, and Discover.